Welcome back to another Explainer. All right, today we're tackling one of the absolute most famous mysteries of the modern age. Yeah, we're talking about the Bermuda Triangle. We're going to systematically sift through decades of paranormal lore, all those wild conspiracy theories, and strip them right back to reveal the hard historical and scientific facts actually hiding beneath the surface. Okay, so let's just dive right into this by asking the ultimate question, the one that's captivated pop culture for, the last 60 years? Does this specific patch of the ocean literally just swallow massive ships and military planes without a single trace? Or is there actually a rational, documented explanation for everything that's happened out there? Now, the legend states that this specific area, roughly bounded by Florida, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, is this crazy hotbed for inexplicable vanishments. And keep in mind, this is a massive, heavily trafficked region of the ocean we're talking about. But interestingly enough, the entire legend of the triangle basically builds from a singular, highly sensationalized piece of writing, rather than any actual statistical anomalies. Seriously, the very term Bermuda Triangle didn't even exist for most of human history. It actually originated from a 1964 article by a guy named Vincent Gaddis for Argosy magazine. And Gaddis, well, he was a writer who, quite frankly, made an entire career out of blaming the supernatural for pretty much everything. I mean, we're talking about a guy who wrote completely serious articles blaming aliens for missing boats and, get this, claiming cursed cars were out to get people. He essentially just took normal oceanic tragedies and framed them as this massive paranormal cover-up. So, to really understand how mundane tragedies were twisted into supernatural lore by writers like Gaddis, we have to examine the poster child of this whole myth, the 1945 disappearance of Flight 19. When you look at the actual timeline here, it brilliantly and tragically illustrates this chronological compounding of human errors that doomed 5 American bombers. It definitely wasn't a UFO abduction. What happened was the flight leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, experienced a failure of both of his compasses. Completely disoriented, he somehow became convinced he was over the Gulf of Mexico. So in his mind, flying west would take him further out to sea. But in reality, he was right off the coast of Florida, and flying west was exactly what he needed to do to hit land. Yet he stubbornly refused to head west, and tragically, the plane simply flew out into the vast Atlantic until they ran completely out of fuel. Now, what's really interesting and honestly just heartbreaking about this is a quote we have from the radio transcripts. The junior pilots in the squadron actually knew the correct route home. They absolutely knew their instructor was disoriented. But because of the super rigid military hierarchy at the time, they tragically followed their stubborn instructor's flawed commands right out into the open ocean instead of just breaking formation to save themselves. So the crucial point here is that when we contrast the sensational claims against the grounded reality, Flight 19 was a devastating result of human error, equipment failure, and bad leadership. It was not portals to Atlantis. And Gaddis conveniently left out those radio transcripts of the pilots arguing about their location when he first popularized the whole myth. Okay, but what about the ships? It's one thing for planes to run out of fuel and crash, sure, but what about those massive cargo ships that supposedly vanished in an instant before they could even send out an SOS? Like, can the ocean actually just swallow a vessel whole? Let's talk about the physics of sinking. To answer this, we have to leave the realm of science fiction and look at hard science. Specifically, this absolutely fascinating 2000 thesis from the Naval Postgraduate School. This research actually tested a very real physical phenomenon, how introducing gas bubbles into a fluid affects its overall density. Now, before testing the theory that giant methane gas releases in the region can sink ships without a trace, the research first establishes the baseline physics using something you might actually remember from high school, Archimedes' principle. Simply put, for a massive object like a ship to actually float, the density of the water beneath it must remain greater than the average density of the ship itself. The ship pushes water out of the way, and the water pushes back up. That upward push, that's buoyancy. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how the researchers tested it. They designed this awesome experiment where they proved that introducing a massive amount of gas bubbles into a liquid drastically decreases its average density, completely removing its buoyant force. They literally pumped gas bubbles up from the bottom of a water tank and watched objects just drop. And this brilliantly illustrates the chain reaction that happens out in the real ocean. The seafloor in this specific region contains massive deposits of naturally occurring methane gas. If a sudden release of this gas happens, a giant plume of bubbles rushes up to the surface and literally strips the water of its buoyancy. If a ship happens to be right above it, the water can no longer support its weight and it drops like a rock to the ocean floor in a matter of seconds. Again, no aliens required. The researchers even created a full physical demonstration apparatus using a specialized acrylic cylinder and bubbly water. They proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that basic fluid dynamics, not some mythical portal to Atlantis, is what sinks these ships. The gas displaces the water's density plummets, and gravity does the rest. It's an incredibly dangerous phenomenon, absolutely, but it's entirely natural. Okay, let's dive into this final section, because it really brings us to the most important question of this whole explainer: why critical thinking matters. I mean, when we have peer-reviewed physics and actual radio transcripts, why do millions of people still prefer the alien story? So the crucial point here is summarized perfectly by researcher Larry Cochet. He warns about the profound danger of letting our desire for a mystery completely override our willingness to accept the facts. Humans we love a good story, right? We have this built-in bias toward the sensational, toward what we want to be true, instead of doing the hard work of looking at the, sometimes mundane reality. And honestly, this isn't just about harmless stories of a spooky ocean triangle. Once false information becomes accepted lore, it actively damages our critical thinking skills. It trains our brains to employ zero skepticism. And that lack of critical thinking, it infects everything. It bleeds into our everyday decision-making, letting our emotions rule our voting, all the way to vital health choices and rejecting proven science. So I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge. Take a look at the mysteries that you hold on to. How do your own biases, your own desire for a really cool story, affect what you accept as truth? You see, when we demand evidence, the world doesn't become less magical. It actually becomes more fascinating, because we finally get to understand how it actually works. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this explainer, and hey, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.